All right, guys, as we're talking about the anatomy of the heart, I'm going to give you a quick overview. There are 4 chambers in the heart. The top 2 chambers are called atria. Singular is atrium. Remember that this is the right side because it's the patient's right side. Even though it's on the left side of your paper, it's the right side of the heart. So this would be the right atrium. The bottom chambers are called ventricles. They're going to be a lot more muscular because they're going to be pumping the blood out of the heart. The right ventricle isn't as muscular as the left ventricle. This only has to pump it to the lungs. This left ventricle has to pump it all the way through the entire body. So it's going to be much larger, much more muscular. But we'll get more, talk about more about that in a second. There's also 4 valves. Remember that valves are going to keep the blood flowing in one direction. It's going to prevent backflow, which is going to prevent mixing of deoxygenated and oxygenated blood. So another thing to remember before we start talking about the names of the vessels, in general, if it's called an artery, it's going away from the heart. You can remember that because artery and away, both start with A. Veins are going back into the heart. And you can remember that because vein is spelled V-E-I-N, and you can remember they're going I-N to the heart. So remember that as we start going through our blood vessels. So we're going to start talking about the flow of blood, and I'm going to go through the structures as I go through the flow of blood. Blood is going to come from the body, and it's not going to have any oxygen. So remember, those blood cells full of hemoglobin, have dropped the oxygen off all through the cells of the body, so it can be used for cellular respiration. Remember, we need oxygen in order to break down glucose as part of our cellular respiration. And now the blood needs to get more oxygen, so it's going to be coming back to the heart to be pumped to the lungs. That's where it gets oxygen. Oxygen exchange occurs in the lungs. So it enters, deoxygenated blood from the body, enters the heart from the superior vena cava and the inferior vena cava. The inferior vena cava is going to be bringing blood from the legs and trunk. The superior vena cava is going to be bringing blood from the head and the arms. So it's going to come in here and here, and it's going to enter the right atrium. From the right atrium, it's going to pass through our first valve, called the tricuspid valve. Tricuspid means 3 flaps, and when you look in a heart, you can actually see 1, 2, 3 flaps, and that is going to open and allow the blood to come in to the right ventricle. Inside the right ventricle, we have a couple of structures you're going to need to know. First of all, there's a special structure, it's only in the right ventricle, called the moderator band. A moderator band is going to help coordinate ventricle contractions. And when you look in the heart, it looks like a thick piece of connective tissue, and it actually kind of looks like a rubber band. So keep on the lookout whenever you open up and look in the right ventricle. Also in here, there's these special muscles. I drew them, they look kind of round, but in reality, they're on the walls of the ventricle, and they're called papillary muscles, and they're connected to connective tissue that looks like strings. So these are actual heart strings. They're called chordae tendineae, and when the papillary muscles contract, they pull the chordae tendineae, and that's going to open and close the flaps. So that is the purpose of the chordae tendineae and the papillary muscles, is to open and close the flaps of our valves. So deoxygenated blood is going to pass into the right ventricle. The right ventricle is going to contract and push it to go to the lungs. It's going to pass through our second valve, called the pulmonary valve. You can remember that because it's going to the pulmonary artery. Remember that pulmonary means lungs, and arteries are going away from the heart. So this pulmonary artery is going to send the blood, so the blood is passed up through here, and it's going to either go over to the left lung or the right lung. It has a choice. Personally, I would choose the right lung because there's 3 lobes versus the left lung only has 2 lobes to make room for the heart. But regardless, they have a choice. So the deoxygenated blood is going to go to the lungs. There it's going to fill up, oxygen is going to attach to all the hemoglobins in all the red blood cells. and now it is oxygenated. So I'm going to switch to my nice bright red marker, and it's going to come back in, or into the heart, through the pulmonary veins. So it's going to come in through the left pulmonary veins from the left lung, and the right pulmonary veins from the right lung, and both of those are going to come into this left atrium. From the left atrium, it's going to pass through the valve on the left side, which is called the bicuspid valve, because it has two flaps, but it is also commonly referred to as the mitral valve. You need to be familiar with both terms and use them interchangeably. So the blood flows, the oxygenated blood flows from the left atrium through the bicuspid or mitral valve to the left ventricle. Again, in the left ventricle, we're going to find papillary muscles that are pulling on the heart strings called chordae tendineae. When the left ventricle contracts, this is a very big, strong muscle, it's going to contract with a lot of force, and create a lot of pressure that's going to push the blood up through our aortic valve. You can remember that because it's on its way to the aorta. So the blood is going to pass through there up into the aorta, the largest blood vessel in the body. The aorta is about the size of a garden hose in adults. So if you see a hose in your backyard, that's about how big your aorta is. Pretty big. And the aorta has many branches that are going to send it off. Your subclavian branches, they're going to send it to the arms and the neck. You have your carotid arteries that bring it up to the head. You also have a branch that's going to bring it down to the trunk and the legs, down on the inferior part of your body. And you also have branches that feed the muscle of the heart itself. So remember, the heart is a muscle and it's doing a lot of work, and so it's doing a lot of cellular respiration. So that muscle, or myocardium, heart muscle, myo means muscle, and cardium means heart, it's going to need a lot of oxygen itself. So the heart muscle itself is given oxygen through two major arteries that you need to know. The right coronary artery is going to supply oxygen and blood to the right atrium and right ventricle. The left coronary artery is going to supply oxygenated blood to the left atrium, the left ventricle, and the septum. And these are coming directly off the aorta. So it's like the heart almost feeds itself first before it feeds the rest of the body, which is very important, since the heart is what's supplying blood to the whole body in the first place. If a blockage occurs here, like a cholesterol or a clot or something blocks the blood, and this heart tissue isn't getting blood and oxygen, that is what we refer to as a myocardial infarction, commonly referred to as a heart attack. And as you can imagine, a heart attack, a myocardial infarction on the right side is going to have a higher chance of survival than a myocardial infarction on the left side, since that left side is so crucial for pumping the blood out to the entire body. It's very important that that heart tissue stays healthy. Now, one last thing you do need to know, in the walls of the heart itself is a couple of layers. There's 4 layers you need to know, and so I've simplified them down into the inside layer. Inside means endo, or endo means inside, excuse me. So the endocardium is going to be the most internal layer, and that's what's going to be coming into contact with the blood itself. The thickest layer is the myocardium. That's going to be the muscle tissue. See how thick it is? That's going to be the thickest tissue. And that's probably what you think of when you cut into the heart in the dissection. It's going to look like steak. It's very thick. The epicardium, epi means on top, so this is going to sit on top of the heart muscle. And then finally, on the very outside, you have what's called the pericardium. Peri means around, so the pericardium goes around the entire heart. When an electrical impulse comes from the heart, remember, the heart generates its own electrical impulse. It is not under control from our brain. It is actually under its own pacemaker control, and the pacemaker is called the SA, or sinoatrial node. The sinoatrial node is right here. When you open up the heart, you'll see it's a little tiny hole you can actually see on the heart. It's really cool. And the direction of electrical signal goes horizontally, or not horizontally, excuse me, but diagonally from the SA node to the apex. The apex is the tip of the heart right here. So that is why whenever we put paddles on a patient in order to try and revive the electrical impulse of their heart, we don't put them side by side like we see in the movies. We put one here on the side of the SA node and the other one on the side to direct the impulse diagonally across the body, kind of the way a seatbelt would sit on you. If you were sitting on the passenger side of a car, it's going to be running from the SA node to the apex.